Margaret Sanger was thrown many obstacles while trying to fight the reproductive overtake of men in the 1900s. In her time, she was one of few women that actually wanted contraceptive methods for all women. When she was thrown in jail once, she did the same thing again, and when she was thrown in jail a second time, she went right back to it. She never stopped fighting for women and herself to have the right to choose what they want to do with their body. This is someone's name we should always remember because she is the reason why we are able to have so many options for birth control methods and family planning. In 1879, Margaret Sanger was born in Corning, New York, to an impoverished family. Her mother died after 18 pregnancies, 17 of which were miscarriages. In the year 1900, Margaret began her career as a nurse. She saw how families were suffering as a result of poor family planning and limited opportunities. She saw how lower-class families had no access to family planning, then were having more children, and so it was hard to climb out of poverty. She wanted to avoid abortions by preventing pregnancies in the first place, which contraceptives could help. The wealthy could already afford and had access to contraceptives and family planning, and they were able to take care of their children because they had the money. Margaret wanted to help the impoverished families to get out of this cycle. In 1914, Margaret Sanger was a columnist for a newspaper called the New York Call, and she wrote about birth control. In March of the same year, she created her own newspaper called The Woman Rebel, and started handing out informative birth control pamphlets. Law officials claimed that this was against the Comstock laws. Going back in time, in 1873, the Comstock laws were created. This basically said that there was no distribution of obscene information by mail or by newspaper, and this included contraceptives, which then made it so Margaret couldn't give out these pamphlets and write in the newspaper about contraceptives. Because of the Comstock laws, Margaret was then arrested and awaiting trial. In October of 1914, the same year, Margaret fled to England under an alias and was supported there, and then later had to return. In 1915, Margaret finally returned to the U.S. from England. A month after she returned, her daughter died at 5 years old of pneumonia. This later helped Margaret gain sympathy from impoverished families. In 1916, while Margaret was still awaiting the trial from the breaking of the Comstock laws, in February her trial was dropped. She then started to lecture around the U.S. about birth control methods and contraceptives. In October of that same year, Margaret opened the first birth control clinic in America. Here she would inform people of contraceptive options, and later she would use this information to perform case studies. One day, while Margaret was in the clinic and had a bunch of patients there was an undercover law official that busted her and her team, and she was arrested again. After a while, though, her trial was dropped once again because the case fell out of the public eye due to World War I. In 1917, Margaret began her very own magazine. The name of this magazine was the Birth Control Review. She was the editor of this magazine until 1928, when she later gave this title to someone else. The rating of this magazine, though, was also against the Comstock laws, and Margaret was in trouble again. In 1921, Margaret organized her first birth control conference. She realized that it was hard to gain support because the Catholic Church really heavily opposed birth control. This was relevant because a lot of people in this time supported the Catholic Church and were very religious. 2 years later, in 1923, Margaret opened her second clinic called the America Birth Control League, later known as Planned Parenthood. She did the same thing as before and offered pamphlets and gave information about contraceptives. In 1950, Sanger worked with a scientist named Gregory Pincus. They worked together to produce a contraceptive pill. 7 years later, in 1957, this pill was officially coined the pill as a contraceptive method. In 1960, the FDA finally approved of the birth control pill sales. Since more people were having less children, this greatly decreased the infant mortality rate over time. And in 1965, there was a court case, Griswold versus Connecticut, that ruled the ban on birth control unconstitutional. And finally, in 1983, the Comstock laws were also ruled unconstitutional. Margaret Sanger gave us the right to birth control, although today people are still fighting to get rid of this.